Take the basins out, girl. His Grace has not come all this way to look at basins. Colne, my lord. What? My name is Colne, she said, and went on stacking the brass into the crook of her arm, 3 deep, without a sound out of any of them. Barnaby, Duke of Carrowden, stood at the long window of Lord Hesketh's library at Nethergill and watched her carry them out. 24 or thereabouts, grey stuff gown, hands scoured red to the wrist and cracked the knuckles the way hands crack when they have been in vinegar and lie all winter. She walked past 3 men and a marble chimney-piece as though the room were empty of everything but the door. "You must forgive her," said Hesketh comfortably when the door had shut. "The apothecary's daughter. Her father kept the shop in the Row until he died of it in January. We give her the still room out of charity. She was at the Wool Hall. Everyone was at the Wool Hall. It took every pair of hands in the parish, and half of them are under the churchyard due for it." Barnaby turned round. There was a fire going and it was too warm, and he had been out of a sick bed 11 weeks and still could not stand heat. "I have come to thank the person who sat up with me." Sabine Hesketh was at the writing table with her hands in her lap, very pretty, very young, 22. She looked at her father before she looked at the Duke, and that was the first thing about the morning Barnaby would remember afterwards, though not for a year did he understand what he had been looking at. Before that year was out, the Duke of Carrowden would stand in a public hall in front of 200 subscribers and be shown, plainly and without mercy, exactly whose face he had never once troubled to look at, and the seeing of it would take his legs from under him. In front of every man in the county. "It was nothing, your Grace," said Sabine. "It was 109 nights. I counted them off the chalk on the door. A woman came in at 8 and went out at 6 and never once let the lamp go out. That is not nothing. I should like to know what to call it." "Christian duty," said Hesketh warmly, "and my daughter's own notion, and I could not talk her out of it." "You were not there to talk me out of it, Papa." "No more I was." Barnaby remembered almost nothing of the hall itself. Chalk numbers on the doors, wet wool, vinegar and rue so strong it was like a hand across the mouth, and cold that came up out of the bones. But he remembered a voice, low, unhurried, no pity in it whatever. It had told him to drink things while they were warm because they would not improve. It had read to him, night after night, out of the only book in the building, a coasting almanac somebody's son had left behind. The lights of the whole shore in their order, Scarrow, 2 flashes, the manacle fixed white, Halloran Head, obscured to seaward. He had gone up that coast light by light in the dark and not died. He had never seen the face above the voice. There had been a linen cloth soaked in vinegar tied across it, as there was across every nurse's face in that hall, and the lamp behind her, and he had been too far gone to lift his head. "When you read to me," he said, "where did we leave off?" The pause was 2 seconds long, and it was 2 seconds too many. "I do not remember, your Grace. I was very tired." "Of course," said Barnaby. He was halfway across the stable yard, pulling his gloves on, when he came round the wash-house and found the Colne woman at the pump with the basins appended on the stones and her sleeves shoved to the elbow, scouring them with sand. "Miss Colne, were you in the Wool Hall?" She stood up. She did not curtsy low and she did not drop her eyes, and he saw that they were a light grey and entirely steady. "There were 9 of us in the Wool Hall," she said. 6 of us came out again." "That is not what I asked." "No, it is not." Barnaby had the odd sensation of having been answered fully and told nothing whatever, and of its having been done deliberately, and well. He had sat 11 years in the Lords among men who did it badly. "His Grace does not want to be kept standing in a yard," said Hesketh, coming out behind them with his hat on. "Tia, the basins, my lord. And when you have done there, you may go down and tell your brother his indenture papers are in my desk and will stop there so long as this house is content." He said it pleasantly, in the tone of a man mentioning the weather. 7 years to run on the boy. He does very well in my stables. It would be a great pity to unsettle him. It would, my lord. Then we understand one another. "We have always understood one another," said Thea Colne. Barnaby rode home through wet lanes with his collar up and did not speak to his groom for 4 miles. He had been raised to believe that a thing settled in a room by the master of the house was the thing that had happened, and he had begun, that morning, to be unable to believe it. She could not walk out of that yard. He worked it out by the third milestone, and it was very simple, and it was in 3 parts. The shop in the row had been sold up to pay her father's debts. The cottage her mother sat in belonged to Hesketh. The boy in the stable belonged to Hesketh for 7 years more. And there was a 4th part, which he did not know yet, and which was the only one that would have mattered to her if all the rest had been swept away. That in a dark room in January, with the chalk still wet on the door, Thea Colne had given her word to Sabine Hesketh, and had not so many things left in the world that she could afford to start throwing her word about. You will want the Fever House accounts closed before Lady Day, Your Grace, and there is an end of it. I want them closed correctly, said Barnaby, which is a different sentence. The committee of the Nethergall Fever subscription met in the vestry of St. Erkens on the 1st Thursday of the month. Lord Hesketh in the chair he had given himself, the curate 2 clothiers, and the Duke of Carrowden, who had put £400 into the fund in January without troubling to say so, and had come out of it with a fever that nearly finished him. The table was covered in bills. Wet wool steamed on the chair backs. Somebody had propped the door with a brick, because the room still smelled of the hall, vinegar and rue and lye, and would for years. Stores, said Hesketh, going down the sheet. Coals, £4.11. Candles. Vinegar, 9 and 6. Linen, £22. Beef and barley from the Bristol house, £71 4 shillings, which is a great deal of beef, gentlemen, but they were sick people and had to be fed. They were not fed £71 worth, said Mrs. Pell. She had brought the keys in to give them up, and had not been asked to sit down, and had not sat down. She was 60 square, and had been matron of the hall for 4 months. You keep a day book, said Barnaby. I do not keep it. I cannot write above my name, and never pretended otherwise. Thea Colne kept it, at that table, at 6 in the morning when she came off, every day for 109 days, and there is not a pennyworth of anything went through the door of that hall that is not down in it in her hand. Hesketh laughed. The still-room girls scribble against a merchant's invoice. Fetch it, said Barnaby. It came in 20 minutes, and it came in Thea Colne's own hands, and she stood at the end of the table while the curate turned the pages, because nobody had told her she might go. It was a small ledger in a paper cover, ruled by hand, and it was beautiful. Date, hour, article, weight, the name of the man who brought it, and a line at the foot of every page where she had signed T. Colne and set down what she could not account for. The 11th of February, said the curate. Beef, £60. The 12th, nothing. The 13th, nothing. Sir, they are invoiced here for 200 weight a week for 16 weeks. There were 11 weeks in which no cart came up the row at all, said Thea, because the road was shut with snow above the mill, and we lived out of the parish larder and what the miller's wife carried up on a pony. It is in the book, and it is in the parish larder book in the chest behind you, and the 2 agree. The vestry was quiet. 9 and £30, said the curate, overcharged. £41 2 and 6, said Thea. Your reverence has left out the candles. Barnaby did not look at Hesketh. He had learned in 11 years of committees that a man's face at such a moment tells you a good deal, and that it is a kind of theft to go and look at it. He looked instead at the woman at the end of the table, who had just, in the flattest voice imaginable, taken £41 out of the pocket of the man who held her brother's indenture in his desk, and who now stood waiting to be dismissed. The account is not to be paid until it is amended, he said. Miss Colne, that book will be entered in the minutes as yours. It does not signify whose it is, your grace. It signifies to me. Afterwards he walked down the row with her, because he had a thing to do and no graceful way of doing it. The lane was a ruin, half the shutters up, the chalk crosses still on 4 doors, the weather taking them off slowly. I have brought you something. He held out the purse. £20. Not payment. There is no payment for it. Call it what you like. She looked at the purse and then at him, and he had the disagreeable sense of being weighed on scales that had weighed heavier things. No, thank you. Miss Colne. Your Grace, I shall be plain, because I have not the time to be anything else. If I walk up that lane with £20 of yours in my hand, by Sunday it will be known in 3 parishes that the apothecary's girl was paid for something, and by Michaelmas nobody will remember what. I have my mother in that cottage on his lordship's lease and my brother in his lordship's stable, and the whole of what I own is that people know exactly what I am. Keep your money. It buys me nothing and costs me the only thing I have. He put the purse away. Then tell me what I may do. Pay Mrs. Pell what you were going to pay the Bristol house. She sat up as many nights as anybody. At the top of the row a boy leaned in a doorway with a blanket round him, one of those who had come through it and was still the colour of a candle. They stopped and put the back of her hand against his cheek and took a cup off the sill and gave it to him. Drink it while it is warm, she said. It will not improve. Barnaby stood in the lane and felt the whole of the winter go over him at once. He did not know why. That was the thing he could not afterwards explain, riding back with the light going. 7 words in a woman's voice, said to somebody else in a lane in daylight. It had gone into him like a splinter under a nail, and he could not find the place it had gone in. He got as far as his own gate and turned in the saddle and looked back down the valley, and could not have said, on oath, what he was looking for. The lights, your grace. Along the coast. I read you the lights. You did, said Barnaby. Which one did we get to? I could not say. It was a long while ago, and I was half asleep myself. Skerrow, he said. 2 flashes. Then the manacle, fixed white. Then Halloran Head, red, obscured to seaward. I have carried it about in my head since January like a stone in my boot. Sabine Hesketh smiled at him with real sweetness. How strange that you should remember it better than I do. And Barnaby agreed that it was strange, and let it alone and rode away with his jaw aching. He had done a great deal in 3 weeks, and none of it had answered. He had had the nursing register of the Wool Hall copied fair and hung in the vestry. 9 names on it in the order they had come in. He had paid Mrs. Pell £11 and settled a pension on her out of the Carrowden rents. He had gone twice to the still-room door and been given nothing whatever. Miss Colne, you have not asked me for anything. No. Everybody asks me for something. It is the whole of what I am for. There is a fellow in Bristol who writes twice a year for a living, and a cousin who writes for money, and the parish writes for a bridge. You keep the day book of my own subscription, and you will not ask me for the loan of a candle. If I ask you for a thing and you give it me, then it is a gift, said Thea, and a gift is a rope with a hand on the other end. I have 2 ropes on me already. I will not take a third from a man who does not know he is holding it. Barnaby stood in the doorway of a room that smelled of dried rue and beeswax and chamomile, with the sun coming green through the bottles, and thought he had never in his life been spoken to so exactly. That is a hard way to live. It is my way, and I have been at it longer than you have. Mind your head on the beam. He came back on the Friday in the rain and asked her to walk down to the Wool Hall with him, and she came, because the keys were hers. It was a great empty room with a roof like a barn and the trestles stacked at one end. The chalk numbers were still on the stalls, 1 to 40. There was a black scorch on the flags where they had burned the straw in February. Which was mine? 9, said Thea. Under the window, because you were fighting for your heir, and it was the only place that had any. You know that. Everybody knows that. Mrs. Pell chalked the numbers. He turned round. She stood by the door with the keys in her hand and the wet coming off her shawl, and there was a stubbornness in her face that he had begun to think the plainest, straightest thing in the county. Miss Colne, who read to me? Somebody who could read. That is 9 people out of 900 in this parish. Then it will not take your grace long. Why will you not tell me? Because it is not mine to tell, said Thea Colne, and it was out of her before she could stop it, and they both heard it land. She locked the door and gave him the key, and he did not press her, because he had understood at last that pressing her was the one certain way to make her stone, and because he was a coward in one particular, which was that he did not want to be told a thing he could not unknow. 2 days later Lord Hesketh came to Carrowden with the curate and a paper. You will not have heard it, sir, living much alone. I have heard it 3 times this week. Heard what? That my daughter, an unmarried girl of 22, sat up alone at night for near 4 months with a gentleman not her kin. Hesketh spread his hands. I do not say there was a moment's wrong in it. I say the county is a county. It has been said aloud in the assembly rooms at Belminster and repeated at our own church door, which is worse, and it is not to be mended by my going about the district contradicting women. It is to be mended, said the curate unhappily, in one way, your grace. Barnaby stood at the window with his back to them for a long moment. He owed a debt. That was the plain fact, and no amount of unease about 2 seconds in a library rubbed it out. Somebody had gone into that hall in January when the strong men of the parish would not, and had held him up in the dark for 109 nights, and had asked for nothing since, and now stood to lose her name for it. He was a man who paid. The banns may be called from Sunday. Your grace is a gentleman. I am a man with an account to settle, which is not the same thing, and I will thank you not to confuse them in my hearing. Hesketh took out a pocket-book and wrote in it, quite openly, the way a man writes down a price. The 11th of May, then, said Erkins. She will want the 6 weeks. They shook hands on it at 4 in the afternoon with the rain going down the glass, and the whole thing took 4 minutes. Riding down through the village afterwards, Barnaby, the still-room window, and the light was in it, and a woman's shadow crossed the green bottles and did not look out, and something in him went over like a horse putting a foot wrong on ice. The 11th of Makes, less 2 days. He told himself all the way up his own avenue that he had done the honourable thing, and he could not afterwards think of a single hour in his life he would rather have had back. You are not sleeping, said Thea Colne, without looking up from the pestle. How do you know that? Because you have come to a still room at 9 in the morning, twice in a week, to talk about the weather, and no man in your grace's position ever wanted to know that much about rain. It was 9 days before the 11th of May. The window stood open on the herb bed, and the whole room smelled green. Barnaby had ridden down with a question in his mouth that he was not brave enough to ask, and had asked instead for something to make him sleep. There is nothing I can give you that is not a bargain with tomorrow, she said. But I will tell you what my father told the men who came out of the mill fire, he said. You did not die, and you have not forgiven yourself for it. He said it takes about a year. She tipped the powder into a paper and folded it in 3 corners squared. Camomile. It is not much, but it is honest. 6 pence. I am to pay you 6 pence. You are to pay me 6 pence, or your grace may buy his camomile in Belminster and be robbed. He put the coin on the bench. Their hands did not touch, and he was aware of exactly how far apart they were, which was a thing he had not been aware of with anybody in a great many years. Miss Colne. If a man had been carried through a bad winter by somebody, and had thanked the wrong person for it in front of witnesses, what ought he to do? The pestle stopped for perhaps a second. He ought to take great care, said Thea, that in going about putting it right he does not knock down 3 people who are standing quietly underneath it. Good morning, your grace, mind the beam. He was married at St. Erkins on the 11th of May, 11 the morning. It rained. The church smelled of wet stone and hawthorn out of the hedges, and Hesketh had laid a red carpet down the aisle at his own expense and made certain everybody knew it. Sabine came up on her father's arm in white sarcenet with her chin down. She said the words in a small clear voice, and Barnaby said his, and the ring went on, and the curate's hand shook. He turned her at the chancel step to take her out, and the whole church stood, and he saw, at the very back, near the font in grey, a woman with her hands folded looking not at him but at the bride, steadily, the way you look at somebody going into a room you cannot follow them into. He did not look for her afterwards. He walked his wife down between 200 people and out under the yew, and it never once occurred to him that there was anything at the back of that church he had needed to see. At 6, in the yellow parlour at Nethergill, his father-in-law shut the door and said the thing he had been carrying about all day. There is still talk of the hall, your grace. There is a great foolish list of names hanging in my own vestry with my daughters upon it among the servants. The Duchess of Carrowden, sir, on a board with a matron and a still-room girl, and every man who reads it stands there and counts the nights again. I have said it must come down. I say so as churchwarden. I should be glad to say it with your voice behind me. Barnaby was tired. That was the excuse he made for himself for 11 days, and then stopped making. Take it down, he said. Found it in the vestry grate that evening, the register of 9 names with it, because Hesketh was a thorough man. He sent for her on the Thursday, kindly with a chair set that she did not sit in. Miss Colne, I shall speak plainly. You have kept the accounts of my subscription and saved it £41, and I know very well what else you did in that hall. Whatever you will not say. I have here a character in my own hand, a place spoken for at Bath at £30 a year, and £20 for the journey, and what am I to do for it? Nothing. Go on as you are. Let the winter alone. There is a young woman in this house today whose name will be pulled to pieces if that hall is talked over any longer, and it does nobody any service, not one of us, to go raking through what is finished. The clock in that library was the only thing in the room for a while. He remembered the sound of it for the rest of his life. You have burned the register, said Thea. It was the churchwarden's. 9 of us went into that room. 6 came out. One of them is in the ground by the wall this minute, and that board was the only place in England her name was ever written down, except the burial book. Her voice did not rise at all, which was the worst of it. And you have offered me £20 and a coach to Bath to say nothing about her. That is not. He stopped. He heard it, standing there exactly as she had said it, and it was true. I will not take your character, and I will not take your money, and I will tell you why, and then I will go. You did not do it to be cruel. You did it because it was tidy. And I have learned this spring that the tidy ones do more harm than the cruel, for the cruel at least know what they are at. She put the still room key on the corner of his desk, and it made a small flat sound on the wood. I have given his lordship notice. My brother's 7 years are his, and I cannot help it. My mother's cottage is his, and I cannot help that either. And I go to Belminster on Monday, where there is a chemist wants a woman who can read a prescription. Miss Colne. There is a general meeting of the subscribers on the 4th of June, she said from the door. To close the fund and settle what is left. I shall be at it. Everything that went in and out of that hall is in my own hand, in a book that is not yours and never was his lordship's, and I have spent this week copying it fair, and the names are at the front of it, all 9, in the order they came in. You do not need to do that. No, said the Colne. I need to do it very much. Good day. The book is the property of the subscription, and I move that it be given up to the churchwarden this morning. On what ground, my lord? Said the curate. On the ground that a discharged servant has no business walking about the county with the accounts of a public charity under her arm. The vestry of St. Erkens on the 28th of May was as full as it had been all year. 2 clothiers, the curate, Mrs. Pell on a stool by the door, 11 men of the parish along the wall in wet coats, because it had rained again, and the Duke of Carrowden at the window, where he had stood for a quarter of an hour saying nothing. The Colne came in at 10 with the wrapped in oiled linen, and stood in the middle of the floor, and did not sit down when the curate offered a chair. You were dismissed from Nethergill, said Hesketh. I gave notice at Nethergill. Your lordship's own housekeeper wrote the date in the wages book, and I shall be glad to have it read out. You kept that book at the charge of the subscription. I kept it at the charge of my own pocket. 3d for the paper at the stationer's in Belminster on the 9th of January, and the receipt is pinned inside the cover, because my father taught me to pin the receipt inside the cover. I was never on the subscriptions books for a farthing. I was never paid, my lord, and you know it, for you sat in that chair in February and struck the nurse's wages out to buy more linen. I said then it was the right thing to do, and I say so now. Barnaby took a half step from the window and stopped, because she had turned her head very slightly and looked at him, and the look said as plainly as any words he had ever heard, "Do not." He did not. It took the committee 40 minutes, and they were the longest 40 minutes of his life to that date. She answered every question herself. She read the account of the 11 weeks of snow. She gave the 9 names in the order they came in, and the dates of the 6 who walked out and the 3 who did not, and when the elder clothier asked her, not unkindly, why she had troubled to keep so exact a book when nobody had asked her for one, she said, because when it was over, somebody was going to say it never happened like that. Somebody always does. They found for her 8 to 1. The book was hers. The £41 were to be recovered. The 9 names were to be written up again on a new board at the charge of the parish, and read out at the general meeting on the 4th of June. Hesketh took his defeat the way such men do, which is not at all. He was on his feet before the room had finished moving. Then I shall say something else, and the parish may hear it. The boy Coln's indenture is sold this week to a house in Bristol, and he goes down on Friday. The cottage in the Row is let from Michaelmas to a man who pays his rent without giving evidence against his betters. That is my property and my affair, and there is no law in England to stop me. There is not, said Thea. She stood in the middle of that vestry with everything she had left in the world, wrapped in a piece of oiled linen under her arm, and Barnaby watched her take it, and she did not go white, and she did not weep, and she did not look at him for help. Afterwards he understood that this had been the whole of her answer to him, that she could bear it alone, the day after he had offered to £2 to be quiet. I am obliged to the committee, she said. Good morning, gentlemen. She got as far as the churchyard gate. He caught her there, with the wet coming off the yew in fat drops, and heard himself say the worst sentence of that spring. Let me put it right. Any of it. All of it. Name the thing. You cannot buy my brother back with a wedding present, said Thea Colney, and if you tried, I should have to spend the rest of my life being grateful, and I have not the constitution for it. Go home, your grace. You have a wife. He went home. He sat in the library at Carrowden until the candles were low, with a coasting almanac open in front of him at the lights of the western shore, and did not read a word of it. At 11:30 the door opened, and his wife of 17 days stood in it in a dressing gown with a paper in her hand, crying so hard she could not begin. Sabine, I must say it now, or I shall never say it at all. You asked me in my father's library what I read to you. I have wanted to be sick every day since. I have never been inside the Wool Hall in my life, sir. Not once. Not for an hour. I was not in the parish. Barnaby stood very still. A coal fell somewhere in the grate, and he heard every part of it. Where were you? At Marham Quay, said Sabine. With my husband. The clock went on. It was the loudest thing in the county. He is a lieutenant of Marines, put ashore in October with his leg gone below the knee, no interest and no living, and my father would not have him in the house. We were married at Gretna Green 2 years ago this month. There is the certificate. I have carried it about the country in my stays like a thief. She set it on the desk and her hands shook so that it took her twice. I was another man's wife when I stood in that church with you. My father knew it. He said it be undone, and it cannot be undone. And when he wanted somebody to have been in that hall, it was, do not say it, said Barnaby. Let me say it. They did every night of it, said Sabine Hesketh, and she gave me her word in the dark that she would never tell you, and she has kept it since January while you gave me the credit to my face. It is void, your grace, not voidable, void from the first word of it. In the eye of the law you were never married at all. Say that again. You were never married at all. The lady was another man's wife when she stood up with you. The certificate is regular, and the Scotch register will answer for it. There will be a sentence of nullity, and it will be ugly for a fortnight, and then it will be over. Then be quick, and be quiet, and send the bills to me. He did 3 other things that week, and none of them for himself. He sent for the lieutenant at Marham Quay, a thin brown man on 2 sticks who came into the library expecting to be horsewhipped, and offered him the bailiffship of the Marsh Farms at £80 and a house, on the plain ground that a man who had held a battery until his leg was gone could certainly hold 400 acres. He laid the false account before the committee with the invoices and the day-book, and Lord Hesketh went out of the chair of the subscription on the 29th of May and off the commission of the peace in the same week. And he sat with the clerk of the justices until 2 in the morning over the law of apprentices, and found what he hoped to find, that an indenture cannot be sold out of the county without the consent of the justices in session, that no such consent had ever been asked, and that the whole assignment was so much waste paper. He did not go near Belminster. He wanted very badly to go to Belminster. The general meeting of the Fever subscription was held in the Wool Hall on the 4th of June, and they brought benches in from the school and opened both great doors, because 211 people came, which is what happens in a small county when a lord is put off the bench. Barnaby took the chair at 11 and gave it up at 4 minutes past. Before any business, I have something to say. It is not pleasant, and I had rather say it here than have it said for me in Belminster. The hall went quiet in the particular way a big room has. In January I lay in this building, in the 9th stall, under that window, and somebody kept me alive. In March I thanked the wrong person for it in front of witnesses, because I was told to, and because it was easier. In May I let the register of the nurses of this hall be taken down and burned, and I said the words myself, "Take it down. 9 names, gentlemen. 3 of those women are in the churchyard." And on the 14th of May I offered the woman who wrote that register £20 and a place at Bath if she would let the whole thing alone. Nobody moved at all. I do not ask the meeting to forgive it. I tell the meeting what happened, because she will not tell you, and somebody in this parish ought to be able to say a true thing out loud. I resign the chair. I will pay for the new board out of my own pocket, and my name is to go where on it. The curate read the 9 names in the order they came in. When he came to Colne T, 109 knights, a man at the back began to clap, and the hall took it up, and Thea Colne stood in the aisle in a grey gown with the oiled linen parcel under her arm, and looked as though she would rather have been anywhere on earth. It was Mrs. Pell who did it. "They ought to see," she said from her stool. "They've given £400 of their money, and not one of these gentlemen has ever seen how it was done. Show them, Thea, show them the way we went in." So Thea Colne set the book down on the trestle and took a strip of linen out of her pocket and folded it and tied it across her face below the eyes, the way every nurse in that building had gone in every night from January to April, with vinegar in the cloth against the fever. And she picked up the coasting almanac that had lain on the window ledge of the 9th stall since the winter, and opened it, and read out in a low unhurried voice, to show the subscribers what a night in that hall had sounded like. Scarrow, 2 flashes. The manacle, fixed white. Halloran head, red, obscured to seaward. Barnaby, Duke of Carrowden, put out his hand and found the trestle, and sat down on the bench behind him like a man whose legs had been taken off at the knee. He knew the voice. He had known it before she was 3 words in. He had gone up that coast light by light in the dark 109 times with that voice at his shoulder, and had ridden past its owner in a stable yard, and stood over her in a still room, and paid her 6 for camomile, and offered her £20 be quiet, and never once in 6 months looked at her long enough to know her. She untied the cloth and folded it and put it in her pocket, and looked up. And that was the moment, in front of 211 subscribers, at which the Duke of Carrowden broke, and every soul in the hall saw him do it, and not one of them ever laughed about it afterwards. He came up the aisle. He was not steady. It was you, in the 9th stall, every night. "It was me," said Thea. "Say the rest of it. Say it here." "There is no rest of it, your grace. You were very ill and somebody had to sit up. And I liked the almanac, and you asked questions for a man with a fever of 103. Her chin was up, but her eyes had gone bright at last. I gave my word to my friend, and I kept it, and I would do it again, and I am sorry it cost you a spring." "It cost me nothing that was mine," said Barnaby. "May I begin again?" "At what?" "At the beginning, properly, in front of these people, so that nobody in this county can ever say it was done in a corner." Thea Colne looked at him a long moment, in a hall that smelled of vinegar and old straw, with the chalk numbers still on the stalls. "You may come to the shop," she said. "Wednesdays. It is 3 for the paper, and you will pay it like everybody else." They were married at St. Ercon's the following February, quietly at 9 in the morning, with the lieutenant and Mrs. Pell for witnesses and Ned Colne holding the horses because he would not be parted from them. The board with the 9 names hangs in the porch to this day. The Fever House is a dispensary now, and the woman who keeps it is the Duchess of Carrowden, better known through 3 parishes for 3 pennorth of camomile than for anything else. On winter nights, when the wind gets up and he cannot sleep, her husband still asks for the lights of the coast, and she reads them out to him in order, low and unhurried, all the way up the shore to the head.